now. So to kick it off, I want to introduce Hammam Jamal, who's a scientist who has automated many different lab workflows over his career and is currently a product manager here at Opentrons. And Emily Scher, who has a PhD in machine learning and is a computational biologist at Neochromosome, which is an Opentrons subsidiary. So if you don't know about Neochromosome, it's a genome foundry offering precision delivery of multi-gene pathways, chromosomes, and even whole genomes designed and built for eukaryotic cells. And today we're going to talk about using large language models such as ChatGPT to write automated protocols for Opentrons robots. Before I hand it over to Hammam, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the Opentrons website. And we'll also send you a copy of the presentation and recording via email within 48 hours. As I'm sure all of you expect, everyone is on mute, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor it through the presentation, so you can ask a question at any time. And then Hammam and Emily will answer your questions at the end of the talk. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hammam to kick it off.
Great. Thanks a lot, Fran, for the great introduction. Yeah, so like Fran said, this webinar is called Can You Use ChatGPT to Write Automated Lab Protocols? Should you, utilizing generative AI for protocol development? So in the recent past, we've been getting a lot of inquiries from our community about this specific topic, about using generative AI or ChatGPT to write protocols, since the OT2 and the Opentrons Flex is Python based and a lot of our content is open source. So in this webinar, we'll be mostly talking about that. So just to briefly go over the agenda for today, I'm going to do a quick introduction of AI and machine learning. For those of you who have a strong scientific background and not much background in machine learning or AI, that's for you guys. Then we'll talk about ChatGPT and large language models, more introductory kind of stuff. And then we'll get a little bit more focused and talk about generative AI and biotech, and specifically the drug discovery industry and what kind of leaps generative AI has taken since, generative AI or ChatGPT has been popularized. And then we get to our question, right? Can you use ChatGPT to write automated lab protocols? And we address that question. We have a couple slides talking about that. We talk a little bit about training large language models, some future visions for Opentrons and AI, and then we're going to leave it off with some questions. Cool. So just to start with an introduction, like I said, to be honest, before this last year, I didn't know much about AI. So for those of you who are scientists here with an OT2 that don't know much about AI, AI is really a discipline. So you think of a discipline kind of like physics. So it's a discipline of computer science, and it's basically making computers act like humans. So making computers have the ability to discover, infer, and reason. Okay. And this is the discipline of AI. And under the discipline of AI, there's machine learning. And machine learning uses data and algorithms to imitate the way that humans learn, to make predictions. And this is, like I said, based on the data that you provide, so it can gradually improve its accuracy over time. There are different types of machine learning. There's supervised machine learning, and that's exactly how it's sound. It's really supervised by a human, where the human is providing the prompts, the ins and the outs, while the machine learns. And unsupervised machine learning is having the machine kind of produce its own content and learn on its own. And under machine learning, there is a specific type of machine learning, and this is where ChatGPT falls in, and it's called deep learning. So I'll briefly talk about deep learning, but it is a type of machine learning. But what's specific about deep learning is it utilizes a structure, like a neural network structure, and it kind of imitates the way the brain works. So there's an input layer, and then there are these hidden layers, and that's why it's called deep learning. There are these multiple hidden layers. And these are, if you think about these nodes, think of them as neurons and how they influence decision making on the way to your decision, which is the output. And that's deep learning. Great. So let's focus our scope a little bit and let's get back to ChatGPT. So what is ChatGPT? For those of you who don't know what ChatGPT is or haven't used ChatGPT, it's a chatbot created by a company called OpenAI. And this chatbot utilizes GPT 3.5 or 4. And what that is the large language model. For those of you who don't know what large language models is, I'll explain it. But ChatGPT was released in November of 2022, and it became extremely popular. ChatGPT enabled, businessmen to organize your meeting notes, create emails. If you're a software engineer, ChatGPT help you code a lot of your content. So it's taken leaps in the coding space as well, to the point where it reached 100 million global users in 2 months. So just to give you some scope, it took Instagram, I think, 2.5 years to reach this kind of landmark, and it took OpenAI 2 months, and that's the biggest in history, the fastest and largest growth in history when it comes to applications. So the utilization of ChatGPT is on a global scale. And what's so special about, what's so special about ChatGPT is GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And what's so special about transformers is that they actually had a big breakthrough in technology. And that's why ChatGPT and these generative models started becoming much more successful. And if those of you who don't know what transformers are, I won't spend too much time on transformers, but if you think about a simple Google Translate translation, and you want to translate something like red car in Spanish, the words are flipped, it's carro rojo instead of red car. And sometimes Google Translate just translates 1-to-1, but a transformer will transform the words into numerical numbers and compare them to the last number and the preceding number, giving you a more accurate kind of reading. So this is kind of like breakthrough technology that is taking place as we speak, and it's growing as we speak. So getting to large language models. So for those of you who don't know what large language models are, it's basically, think about it as a giant box of language or text or anything like that. It doesn't have to be human language. It could be, Python language or anything like that, but just think of a giant box of data. And what ChatGPT is a giant neural network with 175 billion. So what I showed you right here, it has 3 layers with 4 times 3 parameters. So ChatGPT has 175 billion parameters spread across 96 layers. And that's how it can, operate at the level it is operating today. So now that we talked about ChatGPT and how it, helps people with productivity, with, standard things, let's kind of focus our scope a little bit more and talk about how generative AI has helped science, or biotech, things in our industry. So I want to take this time, or you take this slide, to talk about a company called DeepMind. So DeepMind is an AI company that created a software called AlphaFold. So DeepMind is a company that wants to use AI to accelerate scientific discovery. And they haven't really done that until recently with the production of AlphaFold. Before it was all proof of concept. DeepMind, proved, AI functionality with video games and board games. They've produced AlphaGo, which is a really, really accurate, skillful chess robot. Or a Go robot, sorry, and they have AlphaZero, which is the chess robot, and they even applied it to more complicated video games like StarCraft. So now they recently released something called AlphaFold, and what it could do is it uses generative AI to accurately predict a protein structure's folding pattern based on the amino acid sequence. This is a huge deal in the drug discovery industry, just in the science industry in general. About 50 years ago, a scientist named Christian Amundsen, in his Nobel lecture, said that amino acids, or you should be able to predict the 3D structure of a protein based on their amino acid. And we haven't really figured it out until recently with this big boom in generative AI and AlphaFold being, produced. It won 2021's Nature's Method of the Year, and it reached atomic accuracy at Cas14. CAS 14 is really just a kind of like a challenge slash show for, and it's basically an industry that tests, structural patterns in protein folding and the accuracy. And they basically deemed the problem solved. They said that AlphaFold and DeepMind solved this problem, which is a huge deal. It was a 50-year problem that was solved. In addition to protein folding, there are other generative AI models that help with drug discovery. So there's a software called MoFlow, and this is a model that generates novel molecular graphs. And in a drug discovery standpoint, this takes a long time to do. You screen millions and millions of molecules for the optimal molecule that would work with your drug. And this really simplifies that type of workflow and speeds it up. It uses generative AI to basically automatically find the most ideal molecules and models with the ideal chemical properties and conformations. On another level, combining all of this, you can use generative AI, you can use DiffDoc, discovered by a group at MIT, to predict the geometry of how a ligand binds to these type of proteins. So we have been using AI to solve this problem for quite a while. However, this dramatically increased the accuracy. I think the paper is like by 20% or something like that, which is unheard of. I did provide links to both of these papers if you want to take a deeper dive. So we will be providing this presentation, like Fran said. So if you guys want to read these, you guys can just click on the link that I provided for you guys. Really good reads, really interesting. So you can combine, with the amount of support that generative AI has provided for drug discovery, you can really accelerate the screening phase. And just the whole process. You can use AI basically from beginning to end when it comes to screening screening molecules virtually. And this is kind of I stole this from NVIDIA, and this is NVIDIA's kind of model for their software that they're producing called BioNeMo, which combines different AI tools and gives you an easy to use tool to kind of work through this drug discovery workflow. So really big things happening even on NVIDIA's side. Great. So enough with the background. So let's get down to the questions. So can you use generative AI to write automated lab protocols? So the reason why we get so many inquiries about this is because Opentrons is Python based and open source. This is perfect for something like generative AI. It's perfect for something like machine learning. So it definitely can be done in theory. So the theory was kind of proven. Carnegie Mellon released a paper actually utilizing an OT2 and actually trained a model, but that not only writes Opentrons Python API protocols, but it executes end-to-end experiments from reading papers, designing the experiment, then designing it on the liquid handler, and so forth and so on. So a lot of the paper was primarily proof of concept, just proving patterns and stuff like that. But they do have a lot of promising data that you can look through on the chemical kind of workflow perspective. And in the essence of this, other scheduling softwares mention us by name when it comes to integrating AI into their whole scheduling software workflow, which is becoming pretty common nowadays. If you guys know about scheduling softwares and complete automated solutions. Great. So I decided to try this myself. Well, obviously there had to be some training involved, but I wanted to take a first glance. So I basically turned on ChatGPT and asked if it knew about our Opentrons API. So it did. A lot of our content is open source, and I was actually quite surprised that it knew as much as it did, because a lot of the information that ChatGPT provides is not after 2021. Obviously, with new iterations coming out, that will improve, but it did know our most recent API, which was surprising. So I would say when you're giving it a prompt, like just transfer up to 96 samples with a single channel pipette, and these are the lab words, and I just want to do one transfer, it gets pretty close, surprisingly. I was quite surprised. 70 to 80% of the protocol was pretty much in line with how we write protocols at Opentrons. Loading labware was correct, loading pipettes were correct, and even the structural architecture was correct. So it looked something like this. But there was a lot of cons, but it was pretty good for the first round, you know. So a lot of cons about using generative AI models is, you know, the amount of hallucinations it has. So when it needs to improvise or doesn't really know what to do, it will kind of assume it knows what to do and generate something. Like a good example is this Nest 15ML2 rack. This labware is called something else, and I think it just made up some sort of labware name matching different types of labware names. So it does hallucinate a little bit. So labware definitions is definitely a limitation, I would say. So sample number logic. So for example, if I exceed 90 or 48 or 24 samples, it will not know, you know, that I need an extra plate or I need an extra source tube or anything like that to support the change in workflow. So when you're talking about making variable workflows, you definitely need a lot of training to get it to that kind of accuracy. Sample number and logic. Liquid classes. So liquid classes is basically non-existent when it comes to writing the current state of writing programs on ChatGPT. So it won't know if your reagent is viscous. It won't know to add a blowout. It won't know to add a air gap. So these are all things that our FASs and our scientists do to account for different types of viscosities. It gets worse the more you ask it to write. So, you know, I took it step by step. I asked it to write a single sample transfer. I also asked it to write, you know, a two-step sample transfer. So basically a PCR protocol. And I even asked it to interpret CSVs or do simple normalizations. So anything over doing simple sample transfers, the accuracy will dramatically go down. So I'm talking like 40 to 50% or even less. It will get the structural architecture down. It will know how to load pipettes and labware, but it won't necessarily be the right labwares and stuff like that. Great. So can you use generative AI to write automated lab protocols? Well, Carnegie Mellon did, so the answer is absolutely yes, but it requires extensive training and fine-tuning for optimal results. So the way that we want to do it is something called prompt tuning. So we basically provide prompts that give examples of optimal protocols or results. So we have sample transfer prompt 1, sample transfer prompt 2. With those optimized codes, we also point it to updated API documentation. We put it in the training data and we slap it on top of the large language model like ChatGPT. And this will basically make the large language model act with more accuracy, I would say. So like I said, when we want to do something like this, where we want to add a thermocycling program, we want to do multiple sample transfers, when we complicate it in any way, there's no chance that it can produce anything. But so here's the example that we used. You know, we put in this in ChatGPT, we tried to run it and it failed simulation. However, we did train a model. So after adding 5 to 10 really stellar prompts and samples to our model that our FAS has created, so, you know, it has the best practices in terms of coding structure, best practices in terms of liquid handling and all of that. And we basically reran the same exact prompt. We actually got a working simulating protocol just from one response. You know, we asked it to write something and it wrote something that was passable, which was a big breakthrough for us. We were really excited to see this because it was a pretty complicated protocol with the thermocycling steps. So to get to this point, we were pretty excited about it. But yeah, and you can see the difference in the code on the right for those of you who write the Python code, that the architecture is really cleaned up, completely different, and even some of the labware definitions are different because it's providing the correct definitions or default labware definitions, if that makes sense. Cool. All right, moving on. So this is the app that we used to write the protocol. So like, for example, I can open up this app and he gave me a sample one. So if I click here and give us this random PCR prompt that just transfers 100 microliters of reagent and click submit, it will generate the protocol. So this is the trained model. And I'll tell you right now that it's not perfect in any way. We're taking it step by step and giving it really simple protocols and seeing if it passes and really supervising the training here. We are fine tuning it a lot, and this is only 5 to 10 sample protocols. We actually want to expand this dramatically. We want hundreds and hundreds of optimized protocols in this model to be able to say that this is, running in an optimal fashion. So a lot of testing to be done. This is very, very early stages. Great. Moving on. So training an Opentrons generative AI model. So this is what we want to do, and our vision is to train a large language model that can basically generate any laboratory protocol by either uploading your SOP or casually writing a prompt. This is what we want to work towards. This is the vision, and this is our goal. And here's the big kicker, though. The big kicker is that the data that we want to use to train the model is generated by our science and applications team. So all the little nuances, because anybody, our protocol library is available. It's an open source platform on our website, and anybody can train a model for it to correctly act the way you want it to act. But to have all the small nuances of, let's say, an NGS protocol where your master mix or your beads are really, really viscous, how are you going to know what kind of liquid classes you want to attach to those type of transfer steps? It's going to be really, really difficult to get to this vision, if you know what I mean, considering all the small nuances that we want to cover. So to do this right now, we're focusing on the very, very basic workflows in molecular biology. So basic sample handling, PCR protocols. This is what we're working towards to get up and running with just interacting with a simple chatbot. You'll imagine, putting in a couple of parameters, telling it your labware, what kind of pipettes you have, and just explaining your protocol or uploading your SOP for your PCR sample handling. And we want to work our way up. Pooling and normalization and dilutions are a little bit more complicated. And then, DNA extraction is basically a step up, like DNA extraction and cleanups. We basically want, believe it or not, if you write currently on ChatGPT, write me a generic bead cleanup protocol, it will do it for you at, I would say, a 60% accuracy, but you'll see the infrastructure of it. So we do believe that it's possible, and we do want to get to a point where we can be doing extractions and cleanups with just interacting with a chatbot. And the final goal is really one of the most complicated workflows in molecular biology, and that's next generation sequencing. Imagine a world where you can upload your Illumina DNA protocol and it just spit out a optimized protocol or something that you can at least start with. I don't want to say that the protocol will be perfect, you know what I mean? Because you can't really tell it's AI, but we want to get close. So I'm a product manager for our community team, and so I'm in charge of a lot of community initiatives. So how will this AI model that we're training benefit the Opentrons community? Well, our mission says that we make robots for biologists, and we provide the scientific community with a common platform to easily share protocols and reproduce each other's results. So we do want to promote this vision and this mission, and we want to do everything we can to make this easier for you guys. So we basically want to simplify the protocol writing experience. So we're actively working on things to simplify that even further. Just like this, we're exploring AI and ChatGPT to make your protocol writing experience better. We're even exploring, expanding our features on our easy to use graphic user interface and working towards that. We also want to provide the users with a common platform to upload and share protocols. So that's also something we're actively working on. We are actively working on our community, the users, to be able to upload protocols into a common library And so expect to see that in the near future as well. And if it's as easy as, babysitting a chatbot, as opposed to sitting there and writing a protocol on Python or using a GUI, then we're in a pretty good spot when it comes to, expanding the amount of protocols in our protocol library. So that being said, that's the end of this presentation. I did want to leave at least 10 minutes for questions. So maybe we can move to the question part of the presentation. Thanks everybody for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Imam. Plenty of questions coming in. If you still have a question you want to ask, we've got plenty of time to answer them. So just as a reminder, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to start with a question from Jesus. Will it say when it is doing more guessing than not with a comment? So you mentioned, Hamam, earlier that sometimes it sort of guesses and fills in the blanks. Is there any way of telling that it's guessed? Or you have to kind of figure that out for yourself? Hamam, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so if something is pretty much guessed with the protocol that it generates, it'll basically be, you can run it through the simulation and it'll tell you exactly what line and what problem, in what line of code the problem is. So it will get flagged in some sort of way. So we can tell in some sort of way, yeah.
Okay, and then there's a question from David. So on slide 15, so you might need to go back, was this solely the result of prompt tuning, or was a fine-tuned large language model also used?
So it is a result of prompt tuning on the current GPT model. So we did not fine-tune the model, but we did prompt tune. So it's just the result of prompt tuning, yes. Emily, can you confirm that?
I can't. We did fine tune it. We did both. Yeah.
We did both.
Actually,
okay.
I'm not aware that we ever did prompt tuning on ChatGPT. I think we did prompt tuning on Anthropic.
Oh,
but
okay, great.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
Okay, and then a question from Oran. Apologies, it's not clear if this result was from the fine-tuning of model weights or from using in-context learning, which was used to benefit results.
Yeah, so it was based off of fine-tuning. So what Hamam showed was like originally ChatGPT without any fine-tuning still already had a good understanding of the kind of underlying rules of the protocols that we build. But on top of that, we did additional fine tuning, which then improved the model performance better, or even more is what I meant.
Great, thank you. And maybe just related to that, there was a question about whether you were using ChatGPT 3.5 or a higher version.
Yeah, so at the moment, fine tuning isn't available for GPT-4. So the current work that we've done is with GPT 3.5, but the plan is basically as soon as it's made available to swap to GPT-4 because there's a number of improvements.
Great, thank you. So a question from Hassan. How can I get access to the app that checks the protocols? I've been working on fine-tuning a large language model on protocols, and that would be great for testing.
Yeah, I can answer that question. So we do have it available on our website. So if you go to our support page, it actually has a complete guide for you to access the simulator and run it on your command prompt. So if you go to our support page, and we can probably provide it for you via the email, but you can definitely have that simulator on your computer quite easily.
Excellent. Okay, and then question from Zhan Xu. Will the OT model work with workflows that involve non-Opentrons hardware, such as a robotic arm or a centrifuge?
So at the moment, we're only fine-tuning with kind of the normal sets of hardware. But as kind of Hamam showed before, the ChatGPT just on its own from you know, the model training that OpenAI has done on it previously, like already has the good understanding of the kind of rules of writing these protocols. So you might get something that looks okay, but because we're not doing any fine tuning with it, it's a little bit more of a Wild West kind of situation. You might get something that doesn't work. But that, I mean, that doesn't mean that in the future we won't kind of expand this work. I just don't know at the moment.
Great. Okay, two-part question from Andreas. Will you offer a service where users will have access to your in-house developed system? And second part, will that be as open as your API?
That's a great question. I would say that it is quite early to tell if we are going to have something ready for our users. If it is in a good place and everything goes well, we do want to provide it for our users to use. Yeah, and it's too early to really tell right now.
Yeah, okay, perfect. And then this is, I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I'll maybe you guys do. So do you also provide the trained model as well? I'm not sure if we're talking about providing it, like, will we provide it to users or?
If we do provide, go ahead, Emily.
Oh yeah, so I was gonna say, the way that it works when you use any kind of OpenAI product is that the model is actually pretty locked down. So like in terms of actually getting the model files themselves, that's going to be a no. But in terms of having access to the model, it depends on basically how successful things are, and then whether this is kind of developed further into a customer facing product. But certainly any kind of product that we built would be built on top of this kind of fine-tuned model. So there would be at least some sort of access to it in that case, even if it's just like locked through a UI or that kind of thing. That makes sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Emily. Question from Derek. Have you tried using Copilot X in an IDE to see if it improves the workflow of writing protocols?
No, yeah, we haven't used Copilot X in any sort of development at this point.
And then one more question from David. What accuracy do you desire for your future fine-tuned model to achieve in terms of correctly translating the natural language protocol to code? So I guess that's kind of asking like, oh, you know, do we have KPIs that we're trying to hit, you know, in terms of accuracy?
Yeah, so the way that you define accuracy for a model is very much dependent on what you're trying to achieve. And when it's something to do with natural language, that's like a really squishy kind of thing to define. So one of the things that we look at is you can kind of take either a prompt or a protocol associated with it, and you can translate it into an embedding, which is basically just a multi-dimensional matrix that represents that data. And then you can use that to do interesting things like find the distance between two embeddings. So one of the things that we'll do is, for example, if we have, you know, like 100 samples, then we'll hold 10 of them back, we'll fine tune with 90 of them. And then for the last 10, we know what the protocol should ultimately look like. So then without having trained on those 10 prompts, we'll stick them into ChatGPT and then measure the distance of the embeddings that's shot out versus what we expected them to look like. So that's like an example of something that you can do here. But in terms of like having a particular threshold that we're looking for, I think it's more, it's kind of an unfortunately unsatisfying answer to say that like we just want it to work pretty well most of the time. So we're kind of measuring, for example, like how many errors are we getting if we put this through simulation? How many kind of like iterative rounds do we have to put it through before we can actually run it? And then we're just kind of trying to keep track of that and make sure that we're heading in the right direction. If this was, you know, kind of a more traditional machine learning problem, we would have a much more robust kind of set of evaluation tools. But unfortunately, For this, we have a small amount of data. We already have a pretty well-trained model. The kind of underlying data is very unstructured, so it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Excellent. Okay, there's plenty more questions coming. I feel like we've had the softball questions and now we're getting into the hardball questions. So one from Casey, are you considering repeating any of this work in the Llama, LLAMA world, maybe then deployed via Hugging Face or similar?
Yeah, so we've looked into using Llama in particular because in the situation, like, yes, even if we had hundreds of data points, that sounds like quite a lot, but actually in the machine learning world, that's still very, very small. So one of the things that we can use in order to kind of boost those numbers is to do unsupervised learning, which is basically when you just provide a prompt or just provide a protocol, but you don't provide them paired. And because we can come up with just one end of those things much faster than we can come up with those together. That's something that we've looked into, and that's something that you can do in Llama. But at the moment, the kind of accuracy that we've seen coming out of Llama, you know, the currently publicly available version has been not as good as what's come out of ChatGPT, you know, the current public available version. But potentially with more development, we might end up switching to Llama. But it does just kind of take more work. And I think we all have a lot on our plates at the moment. So we'll see how far we get with that.
Excellent. Three more. So this one I think you answered already, but I'm just gonna ask it again for the benefit of the person who asked. So will the data sets for fine-tuning the model be publicly available?
So the majority of the data that we're using at the moment is publicly available through the Git repository. So if you can access that, you should be able to access a lot of that data. I think the data that we have on top of that is not massive. So you already have like 90% of it there.
Excellent. Okay, this I think is more of a comment than a question from Jesus. You should explore incorporating explainer tiles from Beckhoff. Your fast-paced hardware dev group should contact them to make a small robotic arm that is small, light, wirelessly charged. Your Methodet hardware is already friendly to work cell ideation. So any response to that? I mean, I'll definitely pass it on to the hardware team. I know that we have a roadmap exercise coming up, so I think that would be interesting for them to explore. Okay. So one more, no, sorry, two more. If you need to generate a protocol from microscope, do we need to contact the manufacturer, or does knowing the software, will that be enough to generate an AI protocol? And then there's a follow-up question. I saw you had a protocol in Python. Is this the most preferred way to generate the protocol, or are there additional ways?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. So the protocol is in Python, and this is the preferred method when it comes to, you know, using AI to generate these protocols. We do have a way that produces JSON files, but at that point, you're using our easy-to-use graphic user interface to produce this JSON file, and we don't have a good way to convert the JSON file to a Python file. So yes, Python is what we're using. So if you want to generate any protocol on the OT2 robot, you do not need to contact the manufacturers. So if your protocol is really just moving liquids around, you can use generative AI to program a couple of simple sample transfer or reagent transfer protocols. But always contacting either us or the manufacturer is good for advice, I would say. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so there's another one. So I missed the first 10 minutes of the meeting. Was the link to a GitHub shared?
No. So we won't be providing anything that's customer facing for this webinar. We're in really early phases, so we won't be providing anything at this time. Yeah.
We can provide the, so someone else have asked about the simulator that we were using, and we
Oh,
can
yeah.
provide the link to that. And we can do that in a sec. Okay. Ooh, this is a good one from Andreas. Have you used ChatGPT for protocols with the Flex?
Yeah, that is a great question. So the Flex and the OT2 actually share the same API. There's just going to be a lot of added functionality to the API in support of the Flex. So in terms of updating our current system for the Flex, it's already pretty well supported, and we have tried some proof of concept stuff. Yes.
Okay, and then we have one more question, and then we're done. So we will keep it open though for a little bit longer. So if anyone wants to ask any more questions, go ahead. So how does your approach compare to the one Synthase is using applying ChatGPT to protocol design?
Yeah, so Synthase, go ahead, Emily. You can go first and I'll supplement here.
Oh no, if you have a better answer, because I was just going to say I don't really know that much about their approach other than I've just Googled it right now and it does look similar, but but that's not a great answer. So go for it.
Yeah. So Synthase not only deals with, liquid handling, but they have kind of like an all-in-one software. I think it does some scheduling, it does some control and all this other stuff. But one branch of it, they did show some proof of concept stuff, showing a liquid handler, showing the GPT symbol, and it automatically produced protocols. So what they have in mind is quite similar to what we are trying to produce. Absolutely. The difference between us and them is what we're trying to produce is we're trying to get as close to accuracy as possible. So what that means is the data that we're going to train is going to have liquid class data from our scientists and field application scientists, but in the grand scope of things, yes, we are both trying to use AI to generate protocols on a Python-based liquid handling system. I think Synthase does it for a lot of other ones as well, and they're trying to apply it with their software, so it's more broad. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think unless anyone has a burning question that they're typing out right now, I think we're done for the questions. So we will follow up with the link to the simulator, as well as sorry. So Hassan wanted to share that they've made a website to make Opentrons protocols using a context-trained model at molbio.ai. Very cool. And then, sorry, there's one more question that's just coming in from Kamesh. Is there a need to be wary of prompt injection and its impact on automation?
Absolutely. Yeah, the quality of the prompt and the quality of the data that you provide for the model to train will heavily impact how close you are to providing a running, simulating, optimal protocol. So absolutely.
I guess it's also, I mean, more of a general question in terms of like, for large language models, can prompt injection affect the output? And it kind of depends, I guess, on more on OpenAI and their security than it does on than us fine tuning. But I mean, it's yeah, convenient to be able to kind of put that on them, I suppose.
One more question from Michael. What was that website that you just mentioned? So
it was molbio.ai.
So yeah, so molbio.ai.
Yeah, I'll definitely take a look too after this.
I think there's no way of kind of pasting it into the chat. So yeah, molbio.ai.
I did paste it in the chat for the attendees, so should
okay.
Cool. It's super ugly right now. No problem. Us too.
Okay, cool. Super. So I think that might be it for questions and answers. So great engagement. This was really, really interesting. So any last words to Mom, Emily?
No last words. Thank you for the over 100 people that attended. We really appreciate your interest in Opentrons. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.